was in a small forest near my house around 1 a.m. on a winter night. I was practicing meditation, and I sometimes like to go out into nature during sessions. The place was deserted when I got there, so I just sat under a tree and calmly melted into the environment. I managed to get into a pretty deep state, so everything felt dreamlike. About halfway into my session, these two young women, probably in their late teens, came into the forest. They were drinking and giggling, visibly tipsy. They sat down about 20 feet from me, facing away, chatting, and totally unaware of my presence. Finally, one of them noticed me and freaked out. Understandable, since I was just an ambiguous, silhouetted lump under a pine tree. My response was, in a monotone drone, "Don't worry, I am a human woman." I was in a particularly deep state at the time, so I didn't really think about how it sounded until afterward. One of them responded, kind of stuttering, and asked what I was doing. I explained that I was meditating and that they didn't need to worry about me and they could proceed with the drinking. Needless to say, they laughed it off nervously and quickly made an excuse to leave. Years ago, I'd say over half a decade, I got on the subway at rush hour to head home after a long day of classes. I was exhausted. There are periods in my life where I can't sleep. No matter how tired I am, it takes me hours and hours to fall asleep, and no matter how late I finally fall asleep, I wake up well before sunrise. This happened to be during one of those periods. So, there I was, crushed tight in this train, everyone rubbing against each other side by side so we could all fit in. Naturally, like any polite person, I had taken off my bag and held it with a hand between my legs to ensure I wasn't taking up too much space. I was spacing out. On top of my lack of sleep, I was one of those idiots who had the great idea to have a 4-day weekend and scheduled all my classes on 2 days, meaning I'd just had 9 hours straight of dull lectures. I noticed out of the corner of my eye that the guy standing to my right kept glancing at me. I didn't think much of it, but did realize that he was doing it regularly throughout my 10 minutes on the train. We got to my stop, and the guy next to me moved to get off as well. I felt a pull on my bag and quickly glanced over, thinking, he's not actually trying to steal my bag, is he? Nope, it turns out I hadn't been holding my bag at all, but instead I had been grabbing a bit of his coat sleeve the entire time, like I was some little kid and he was my mom. By the time I realized it, he was already speeding out of the door and I couldn't even apologize. I still blush and get embarrassed every time I think about it to this day. I recently found this subreddit about stalkers and creepy encounters, and I'm addicted to reading it. Being a large man, I don't have many creepy stories that happened to me. However, I was a very awkward young man and was the creep a few times. This is one of those times. This takes place at the end of my senior year of high school and the summer after in 2004. Throughout high school, I was morbidly obese, which led to severe insecurity, and I had no idea how to approach women. I lost a significant amount of weight in my senior year due to drugs, but probably not the drugs you'd think. I had started smoking pot on a daily basis and was tired of getting hassled about it by my mom. I didn't have a vehicle at the time, so I just started walking everywhere instead of asking her for a ride. After about 9 months of this, I ended up losing 110 pounds. However, as most people who lose a lot of weight can attest to, I couldn't see it and was still incredibly insecure. I had a girlfriend at the time, and I didn't even realize how much she liked me, or the fact that her parents were also major stoners. Looking back, I think I would have stayed with her since I did like her a lot, but I guess I was just more interested in partying at the time. One of my smoking buddies was in the cosmetology program at my high school and introduced me to Ashley. Ashley went to the high school in the town next to mine, but attended the cosmetology program at my school. My friend knew I was interested in dating a girl who liked to party, so she introduced us and we hit it off. I dumped the girl I had been seeing, and she took it incredibly hard. Things went well with me and Ashley for the next month. I spent a lot of time at her house and at her friend's house, which was a known neighborhood party house. I had also recently gotten a car from my grandpa as an early graduation present. One night we had made plans to hang out, and she canceled at the last minute. Being a semi-neurotic 18-year-old, I did what my underdeveloped prefrontal cortex thought was rational and drove by her house. I saw that her car wasn't there and came to the conclusion that she was avoiding me. I drove by her friend's house after that and didn't see her car there either. I headed home, and when I saw her at school the next day, I asked her why she had canceled. She said it was because she wasn't feeling well, but I replied by telling her I had driven by and noticed her car wasn't there. She didn't respond much to this, but did tell me that her sister would use the car sometimes. I accepted this explanation and figured everything was fine. Apparently, everything wasn't fine. She became a lot more standoffish towards me after this, so I became much more persistent, assuming I hadn't been putting in enough effort. She would leave her cosmetology program at 11:30 every day in order to get back to her school on time, so I started waiting outside the classroom to walk her to her car. I would leave my class about 20 minutes early every day, pretending I had to use the bathroom. I couldn't see how uncomfortable I was making her, even though she wasn't interested in kissing goodbye anymore. She worked at a nearby clothing store, so I started waiting for her there when she got off work as well. If I could go back in time, I would kick my own ass. Finally, she agreed to hang out one Friday night at 5. When Friday came, I tried to call her, and her phone went straight to voicemail. 2 hours and 40 or so calls later, I was freaking out, thinking she had been in a car accident or something awful like that. I decided it would be a good idea to go look for her to make sure she was alright. After driving past her house and seeing that her car wasn't there, I decided to go to her friend's house. In hindsight, the way I decided to approach the house was very creepy, but to my adolescent mind, which was stoned 90% of the time, my plan was the perfect idea. I parked down the street and began walking. I was on the opposite side of the road and could hear laughing coming from the front porch, where they generally hung out and smoked cigarettes. I drew near and stopped a little ways away, thinking I was unseen, and noticed her car in the driveway. As I debated whether or not to approach, I suddenly heard the laughing stop and the house grow quiet. I had a feeling I needed to leave, so I turned around and went back to my car. The next time I saw her at school, while I was waiting outside of her classroom, of course, she told me that they had seen me on Friday and asked me what the hell I was doing. I tried to explain my thought process, and she told me she needed a few days to think about things. She asked me to stop waiting for her at school, and I did. A few days turned into a few weeks, and soon enough it was graduation. She wasn't answering my calls, and I wasn't getting the hint, so I started waiting outside of her work again. I didn't get the hint until she threatened me with the police and a restraining order. I can understand now why she never wanted to see me again. I'm a tiny 20-year-old girl, and I go to college at a small, pretty campus with a lot of secret hiding places. As a photographer, I like exploring all of the attics, roofs, and locked doors that the buildings have to offer. My favorite place, though, is this abandoned lot buried in the woods. It used to be home to a large monastery that was later torn down after someone was fatally injured while exploring it. I like to go out there on Sunday mornings to have some quiet time to myself and maybe take a few pictures. There's a small house at the beginning of the path where an elderly couple lives. I've always liked going there the most in cold weather, so I'm usually wearing my big LL Bean parka with some sort of hat and gloves. Since parts of the lot are thickly covered with weeds, I wear sweatpants over my jeans and work boots. One day, when it wasn't as cold, I went out with a light sweater on. I waved to the elderly couple as I passed their house and kept walking into the woods. I did a few laps around the property and was taking pictures when I noticed something weird in my viewfinder. The elderly man was watching me with binoculars. I immediately started walking back and thought it was best to confront him, hoping that it would just be a misunderstanding. It was. He explained that he was watching out for me because he was worried that I would encounter the hobo that lived in the woods. He explained that they saw him walking around often and they thought he was deranged. I guess word had spread, and the surrounding neighborhood families had forbidden their kids to go out into the woods alone because of the infamous hobo. I told him that I go there often and I had never seen anyone else, but he insisted that they saw him all the time. I asked him for a description. Short, tan jacket, sweatpants, and boots. I figured it would be best not to explain that I was the hobo. A while back, several friends and I decided to go camping, which was basically just an excuse to get very drunk for several days. I had work during the day, so everything was set up by the time I got to the campsite around 9 p.m., and I started heavily drinking to catch up. After a few hours, we noticed we were running out of firewood, and we had a competition to see who could get the most. I headed off away from the group and found some leftover logs. When I got back to the site, no one was there, so I just started splitting the wood with an axe and having a good time. All of a sudden, a young couple came out of the nearby tent with the most horrified expression. That's when it hit me that I was at the wrong campsite. From their perspective, it must have been terrifying, seeing a random stranger laughing while swinging an axe around their campsite. I apologized and quickly got out of there.